Call the Little Falls special work session for the Little Falls City Council to order for the February 22nd, 2022. We do have a quorum. We are all here with the exception of Councilmember Knopfler. Public forum. Individuals may address the City Council about items on the agenda or not included on the agenda. Speakers are required to state their name and address for the council record and limit the remarks to 3 minutes or less. Speakers are requested to frame their comments around items that fall within the authority of the City Council. Generally, the City Council will not take official action on the items discussed at this time, but may place the item on file, take the matter under advisement, refer the matter to staff or a committee for a future report, or direct the matter to be placed on an upcoming agenda. We have no one here to speak. Anybody online? Bill discussion. Does anyone have questions with the bills?
Yeah, Mr. President, I am on page 6 of the bills. There's a gaming audit for. No, you'd have to go down to it, but it's for $14,345. Why would we be paying for an audit?
It's out of the agency fund. It's out of the Lions agency fund. So the Lions donate money to the city, and then we're paying that through their agency fund.
It's basically a pass-through.
Make sense?
Not really, no, but.
Gambling, I believe.
Yeah.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but because the Lions have charitable gaming,
Right.
They receive that money and they have to be audited, and it has to do with the Lions Park, and we pay some expenses, then they reimburse us for those expenses.
Well, almost 15, we went through an audit with the American Legion, and they're almost up to $1 million in gambling money, and we only paid less than $5,000 for an audit to them.
So it's 3 years. It's a 3-year audit, not just a single-year audit. It was a 3-year audit, and since it's a pass-through, we aren't designating who they're using to do their audit.
Because we're not paying for it.
Right, we're not paying. It's not our dollars, it's agency dollars that just pass through.
We do this with a few other places too, or
Correct.
where money's passed through.
Any other questions with the bills?
I have a question. It's just a little tiny amount, $175 for a pool membership?
For a
A
what?
pool membership?
I believe that's the pool membership for our insurance pool, for our,
Oh, I thought someone was going to the gym and swimming.
no, it's for our
Wait,
drug
we
testing.
pay
It's our-
personal memberships now?
No, it's for our testing, drug testing pool. We're part
Okay.
of a pool, and then so yes, that's not swimming pool, no, just a group of people pool.
Thank you, Lori.
Any other questions? Any consent agenda item discussion? Council information only items. Heritage Preservation Commission review. Councilmember Lundberg and John. And I don't see Gary. Or is Gary online with us?
No. So Lori and I met with the HPC last week, talked about a variety of different topics, but one of the items that came up, and I know the council was talking about this at the last meeting, and I recommended that we would discuss it and bring it back to them, was the Howard Building on First Avenue Southeast, owned by Mr. Briscoe, and his message and request for some level of reconsideration about this. So I included in my update last week a description of that conversation with you all. We talked about the various. A lot of it was around, there's various different districts. There's the National Preservation District, there's the local historic district, we have local landmarks that the HPC is a part of, and even the past and the decision about how did the Broadway Sports Bar in 2015 get approval for their steel roof when it was, as we've discovered, replacing a material that wasn't steel. Don Opatz was part of this conversation too. He's been, he was on the HPC for a long, long time, from its founding to up until a couple years ago, and explained that his recollection about that approval was it was discussed, and the building being, center of the block, it was not as visible of a roof line. And at that time, I believe they consult too with the State Historic Preservation Office, and they said if that's the determination, because it is center block, the visibility of the roof wouldn't be as big of a deal. Now, I recall when Mr. Briscoe appealed it the first time, he showed a picture where the roof line of Broadway Sports Bar is visible, but I don't know if that was part of the consideration. The justification that they had on the building is that building sits at the end of end of the block. It's highly visible from both directions for the type of material in the roof, and based on the insight of the State Historic Preservation Officer, that that material wasn't in line with the time period that we're looking back. That was their opinion based on, that was what Gary had consulted with them. Gary had lots of conversations with Mr. Briscoe about this, both before, during, and after the appeal process. So to me, I guess the recent spur of why is this coming up again from the property owner is, I guess, related to the HPC approving the steel siding on the First Avenue Auto building. And their explanation on that approval is that material was has been a part of the building for a long time, possibly prior to the start of the HPC even being established. Taking the material off would expose the brick, and the brick would be likely not to the point where it could be salvaged or restored up to the standards that would need to be. That the Little Falls brick, the yellow brick, is after all these many years, decades, it's likely that isn't salvageable or can be restored without significant cost. And since it had been a part of that building for a long time, that they would allowed for replacement. Now, the rest of the steel extending onto the former Larson Law Office, that building was not included in the National Register of Historic Places, so it's part of a different district. And I think the determination was, Greg and Lori, I think you were part of that meeting too, in the conversation, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm basing on a conversation last week that continuing the siding across both buildings would make the buildings appear as they're one building instead of as they are, they are separate. So, but I mean, it's the same owner, and they're effectively using both buildings for the same purpose. I mean, it's just, it is one business operating out of those structures. The roof replacement is on the one side like for like with the rubber roof, and I believe the other side is changing from shingle to rubber, but again,
Nope, they're all rubber.
Oh, they're all rubber?
Yep, they're both rubber.
So like for the roof part is like for like. So the conversation about the siding, I guess, in some level is different because it's metal siding, not metal roof. But we talked about it, and they've been over this, is what Gary's message was, and that really, he said he's had conversations, and while Mr. Briscoe didn't like the decision that was made, Gary felt that he understood it. So, I mean, to this point, it's bringing it back, going through, we'd have to go through whatever our process are to, bring that back again, I guess, and reconsider something that was already voted down or rejected, if that is truly what we want it to do.
I think the other piece of that is we have these districts set up, but even within the districts, there are contributing and non-contributing buildings. And so the old Larson Law Office building is not in a district at all. and the First Avenue Auto is in the district, but it's not a contributing building. So that those all have impacts on their decisions as far as, you know, what is allowed and what isn't allowed.
What's the classification of the Howard Building?
It is in the National District, and it's contributing.
And Johnny C's?
National contributing. They're both in the same district.
Okay, well, I guess his issue is really, Johnny C's got a steel roof and we don't, and that's not fair. That's what his issue is.
Mr. President, John, I remember Gary saying something about, or maybe it was, I think it was Don saying about, it's almost like there was guidelines for corner lots, which were not the same for the center of the block.
Right.
Correct.
And that's where this came into play, I believe,
That,
correct?
yeah, so if you're asking the question, what, you know, if you're saying, he got a steel roof, I didn't get a steel roof. We're both in the National Historic District. What is the differential factors between the two? Johnny C's is mid-block, and his building's on the corner. That was, that based on a lot of the discussion, I'd say I'd break it down into that being the key difference.
I have a question I don't know if anybody knows the answer to. And that is, in the review of the email, it looks to me like Mr. Briscoe is alleging that a conversation was had with the building inspector prior to him ordering materials. I'd like to get some clarification from Dave on if he did have a conversation like that with him.
And I did reach out to David before the HPC meeting. He did not have that conversation with them. He wanted him to submit the building permit for it, but he didn't approve anything beforehand, because that was one of the questions that the HPC had as well. So, no, he did not have that conversation.
Right, because I mean, I'd be prepared to bring it back if in fact, if it was a situation where the question was posed, can I put a metal roof on this building? And the answer was, you know, yes, it needs to meet this criteria.
Right.
So he orders the roofing material. But, you know, the difference here is Johnny C's, they did get their roof. They also followed the process. They got a building permit first, and it was approved by the HPC. Mr. Briscoe just started working on his roof, and then after the fact, tried to get a permit.
Mr. President, I believe when this was all coming up, I believe the gentleman looking to put the roof, that steel roof on, I remember him having a text message with somebody from the county or the city that was telling him how everything had to be laid out to put a steel roof on that building. So he had a conversation with somebody that was explaining to him how that steel roof had to be laid out with the laths and everything else to go over the rubber, so.
I saw the email or the text messages. It's been a while, but if I remember correctly, that was between him and, I don't think it was his business partner, but it was a contractor or employee of his putting that on. It definitely was not with David or somebody from the city.
David said that, you know, he gets text messages all the time, and he generally calls people back. He doesn't, I'd say in most of his work, he doesn't do business via the text message. He does it over the phone. So, you know, whether those conversations, I trust David's opinion on that. I trust, you know, that Greg had that conversation with him, so, you know,
That may be right. I remember seeing the text message. I thought it was with some
Yeah, I
county
think-
or city official, but maybe not.
No, I think the argument Mr. Briscoe was making is that I was in touch with the building official prior to getting the permit or prior to the project going on, so I was trying to have a conversation. Whether or not he got all those details and were told that, I think, we're now saying one word against the other, and I'm saying I'm trusting the building official's opinion on that. We've had a lot of conversations back when we had this appeal prior to, it coming up. So,
I have the text right in front of me.
Well, so do I. So it was outgoing from Mr. Briscoe to Dave, to which there wasn't a response on it. So it's outgoing on May 11th. Morning, Dave. I have the roofing crew here this morning doing some measuring. Hope to put steel roofing on the commercial building downtown. Can they put purlins over the top? I won't read the whole thing. And then it
That was
goes
May
on to a
11th.
text with somebody else in August. And this is when the work started. So there's nothing in between there
yeah.
that we have documentation for.
Yeah, I guess to me, part of the problem is as well, like, do we want people to follow the process or not? And we want them to follow the process, obviously. That's why we have our permits. That's why we have the HPC. It is very clearly in the rules that any building in the historic district, both national or local, still has to have a permit review and approved by the HPC for any of the work that's happening on the exterior of the buildings, roof, siding, whatnot, windows. They still have the opportunity to review and approve that.
But my understanding is the line of sight is what determines what can and what can't be done.
So there's certain materials in the HPC that are allowed, and certain materials that are not. And also depending on if it's contributing, not contributing, will also determine in that factor in that determination. And like John mentioned, a lot of times they'll reach out to the State Historic Preservation Officer to see, okay, here's the building in question, here's our district. Is this going to be allowed? Is it going to impact it negatively? Ultimately, they're looking to keep the historic district looking historic. And so they reach out to them to see what their expert opinion on whether or not
I understand that. So what you see, they want looking this way, but you go around to the other side of that very same building, and it could be in such terrible shape that you wouldn't even want to take people back there to see it. So, and a part of the argument from HPC was, well, this was in the middle of the block and you couldn't see it from Broadway Avenue. Well, this whole thing with line of sight and approving this or that is, to me, just, it gets too much, we get involved with it too much because there's no guiding factors on how to determine what is and what isn't.
I don't think that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing there is a guiding factor.
There is guiding
according to
factors.
mid-block and according to corners.
Yeah.
So that is a guiding factor.
Yeah, whether, I wasn't here during the Broadway Sports Bar, I wasn't part of that approval process, and I'm not certain exactly how it went down in terms of when did they contact SHPO and, what level of ask, but based on what Don said, is that they had, they knew it was gonna be a metal roof, that was the request. And the exception to allowing it to be a metal roof was based on their ask and response to SHPO and the, I guess, expectation that because the building was mid-block, it wasn't gonna have the sight lines and visibility of seeing the material. Now, whether they went on site and they looked and drove down the streets and did what Mr. Briscoe did and was able to take a picture where you can clearly see what the roof is and where, what material it is, I don't know. Maybe that was their oversight at the time to not do that. But when you ask back to the question of why them and not me, I mean, their justification is, and they're very firm in their decision, has been to say the building is on the corner. The SHPO officer said it's going to be a highly visible line of sight for that building.
Well, Mr. Briscoe claims that in his email from September 18th, that David did not answer his text, so he called him on the phone the next day. And he says, steel roofing was proposed, and he said we have to follow the code for installation, such as spacing of purlins, spacing of fasteners, and size of fasteners. So he claims that he did talk to Dave about it.
And 99% of what David does is, or not 99, but a lot of what David does is outside of the historic district. So his mindset isn't first and foremost, is it in the historic district when I'm answering a question. His is, I'm, the building
Correct.
official, and what I really know is the state building
Right.
code. That we, again, follow the process, because if that permit would have came in, it would have went to HPC and it would have been denied. Regardless of what David told him or not, it still would have had to follow the process on the permit because of the location. That's why we have the zoning administrator to oversee things. That's why we have, staff to review this, so that when these permits do come in, that we have that time. It is unfortunate that the permit wasn't applied for, whether that was him and his contractor not on the same page for communication, which he's claiming it was, but you had time period from May, when he was considering the project, until August, when he actually started work, that a permit could have been filed in that time and still would have been valid for construction. And it would have went through the process of review, it would have been considered. I'm not saying that the HPC is denying it because he didn't file the permit. They're denying it based on the reasons that Chippo said. It's an end of the block steel material, and that format is not in congruence with the historic district. We recommend denying it.
Mr. President, the vote we took was to either accept or reject the recommendation from HPC. It wasn't about permitting or anything else. The vote we took was, were we going to accept the recommendation from the HPC or not? Not on whether he got a permit or anything. The vote was specifically on accepting that
Well,
recommendation.
right, but that's facts that led to me voting the way I did. The fact that he didn't get the permit first. So, I think we can sum this up. I voted to accept the recommendation. Somebody who voted like I did would have to propose to bring it back. It's not going to be me. We made our decision, and I'm fine.
That's true. To bring it back up, it would have to come from a member that voted in the majority.
Yeah, we understand that.
Redistricting, ordinance number 29, 7th series, amend ward boundaries. John?
Thank you, Council President. On Tuesday last week, the state boundaries and congressional districts and the legislative boundaries were established by a panel of the courts, Minnesota courts. They had some pretty dramatic impacts in terms of who our representation will be from in the city of Little Falls and across Morrison County. But the fortunate part is it didn't have any impact in terms of our specific city jurisdiction and boundaries. So we are clear, to my opinion, moving forward and approving the ordinance based on the recommendations that we had. So that said, this is my hodgepodge on the computer diagram of what the boundaries would be, for that we've discussed.
Should have had the engineer draw that.
Yeah, I should have had the engineer draw that. It's the GIS systems that, might be a lot better and cleaner to put that on for me. So the consideration, Chelsea Robinson called me today, and the county is certainly very interested in us finishing our process because they're in the process of doing it as well. And we very much drive kind of the nature of what happens for the county. So their preference would be for us to set our wards, and then they would use our internal boundaries here for their district, so that in the county, for the county officers or elected officials, that they're not impacted by the city boundaries. So we're not splitting up our wards across different commissioner districts.
questions
Mr.
about that?
President, this mapping here, that would not affect our county commissioners and their districts.
They've seen this, they know the territory we're talking about, so they would just assume, yep, they would plan accordingly and they would split up. So each one of these wards would be part of a different commissioner district. And they have to split up Little Falls that way because there's no way they can split the county equitably without splitting some part of Little Falls for 5 commissioners.
Any other questions? 14th Street Southeast update.
I guess I did want to touch on one thing.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You know, as if, in consideration to this, you know, there is a couple cleanup pieces in the ordinance that I just want you to take note of for the approval that our attorney addressed. You know, looking forward, if the boundaries, jurisdictions of the city were to expand, you know, we'd certainly want to take that into consideration. But, you know, what we kind of define is that anything east of Highway 10 stays in part of this Ward 1 area, probably up until a certain point where, you know, we would have to say, like, I don't know, is that County Road 46? That's on this north end, that would come into Ward 2. You know, so we could have, in future years, have the similar annexation problem. I mean, that's probably gonna happen anyways, now that we've gotten the numbers back to balanced, you know, because you're unlikely gonna have annexation across all 3 of them that's gonna have equal population. So, you know, even if this does stay where we want, and we don't go to, you know, something different in consideration with the Charter Commission that we discussed last fall, you know, I think that's something to look at, but not something that would be a barrier to approving this, to say, okay, well, yeah, we know this population up there. I wouldn't plan for annexing in terms of redistricting. Let's redistrict with what we have today, what we know what the population numbers are based on the census data, and just make sure that we meet the standard that was set in terms of the charter.
Go ahead, Greg.
Thank you, Mr. President. So in the work session as well as the regular meeting, you'll notice that we refer to 14th Street on there quite a bit. If you recall, last year we did bid that project out. We went through the process for the Chapter 429 for assessing of that one. Bids came in, and then we ultimately rejected those bids. But because time passed between then and now, we're basically starting that process over again to go through the steps. So you'll see in the regular meeting, we've got call for the feasibility report, accept the feasibility report, and then call for a public hearing, basically to get that on that same schedule or similar schedule to what we have for the other 2022 projects. So that's what we're looking at for 14th Street. Not much has changed in that. We just know that the developer is looking at building those apartment complexes this year, and so we're looking to be prepared for that construction activity.
Any other items? Or any constituent messages? If there's no,
One quick thing, I don't know if you've met the new county engineer, Tony. Tony Hennon's the new county engineer, so we'll be talking about 4th Street this evening, so he wanted to sit in and hear or potentially give input if anybody has any questions on it. So just wanted to introduce you to Tony as the new county engineer.
welcome.
Hi, Tony.
Welcome. Again.
If there's nothing else, at 7:01, we'll adjourn until our 7:30 meeting.